Good afternoon, and welcome into the Senate Government Operations Committee meeting of Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. Few issues to discuss today, including 8S23, an act related to the use of synthetic media in elections. And I felt it would be very helpful if we had the lead sponsor come in and talk about this. And then we will go from there to a couple of other things and eventually vote, by the way, on H78. So I think you certainly know two of the people here.
I know Senator Hart.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Hey, everyone.
So we're very happy to have Senator Hardy from Addison, the Addison District, joining us today, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to be back in the Senate Ops room. Thanks for having me. S23 is a bill about the use of synthetic media in elections. Synthetic media is a more formal way of basically saying AI, the use of changing images or sound in a broadcast or in a photograph or in some kind of piece of media using a synthetic device or program.
Okay.
And I'm not a tech expert, so I don't know even how to do that, but lots of people will now know how to do it. And there are a lot of programs that can easily do it for anybody who wants to do it. And this has become a thing that's been used in elections recently. I think the most well-known sort of regional instance of this was there was an AI version of former President Biden's voice used in a phone call during the primaries in New Hampshire, telling voters not to vote. And people thought it was the former president's voice, but it wasn't. It was AI generated. And that can happen to anybody, any of us, any candidate, any party. It's not a partisan issue. It's a technology issue and it's a deception issue. And so this bill is a version of legislation that's passed in a lot of different states, including, for example, Texas and California. So, reds and blue states. It would not prohibit the use of AI, but it would say that if you are using AI, you have to say that you are using it, that you have altered an image or a voice or something using AI, and that particularly 90 days before an election. And so it sort of tracks similarly to our mass media requirement that you say if you're buying a mass media buy within 45 days of an election, you have to report it. So this is similar kind of, closer you get to an election, the more people are paying attention and watching commercials or seeing things online or on social media. And so that it's more important to have that kind of thing. And then if you violate it, there are penalties for violation, and these are penalties that are similar to other elections violations. And the penalty is more stringent if you are using synthetic media to incite violence. So to say, you should do something violent against another candidate or against a poll worker or against somebody who's working in an election. So it's both a way to ensure honesty and good information during elections, and also to ensure fair and safe elections for Vermonters. This, as I said, has been passed in a lot of states, and I think you're hearing from Alana Beller from Public Public Citizen.
Yeah.
Thank you. So she's worked with a number of states, and she'll have a better sort of national perspective on where this is has passed. Massachusetts recently passed law that's similar to this. So you could hear from somebody in Massachusetts, even, I don't have a specific contact, but I'm sure you could find somebody. There are, I'm sure you'll hear from some tech lobbyists who are already in the building. They've stopped me in the hallway already about liability issues and who should be liable. I leave that to you all to work out, but I know that Senator Clarkson is extremely familiar with that because that came up with the data privacy bill last year.
Yeah.
So a lot of states have passed it already.
This type of bill,
Alabama,
yeah,
Alabama, Alaska.
Yep.
Senator
yeah.
Clarkson, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And I can't remember because I don't have the bill in front of me, so I need to get
Yeah.
it printed out.
California did it.
Okay, no, my question is 90 days from all elections or 90 days from the general election or for primaries? Does that include the primary and the general election?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head because I worked on this a while ago. It just says 90 days of an election, so that might be something you want to clarify
I
to
think that's
include both,
just an issue.
both primaries and general elections, and local and state.
Senator Mikulski.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm wondering if there's a reason why we would preferential or like protect some elections and not other elections.
I want to do all elections,
Okay.
but I want to make sure.
You want to make sure
Yeah.
that that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
we're all on the same page.
There's
I
not
was like,
any,
wait a minute, what? All elections are important?
the intent was that it be all elections, and it just says of an election, and given that we have different types of elections, it might be helpful to clarify that in terms of town meeting day and primaries and general.
And maybe even.
In Ireland, the Senate passed it, but the House didn't pass it.
Okay, we'll get all that. as we move on.
It's kind of neat. There's a whole right there in front of you.
The other, I don't know if it's obvious question. It's obvious to me, so I guess it's obvious. Why don't we just ban it? Why is it sort of like one of those things where you potentially could ruin someone's campaign?
Yeah.
And then after all you have to do is say, oh, well, just kidding, I used the fake thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think that some of the expert witnesses you have you should ask them, ask Alana that question, for example. I think that there are a lot of potentially beneficial uses to AI. And there's also a fine line of what is AI in synthetic media. So for example, if we used a photo of a candidate and made him look taller or made her look,
In my case?
whatever. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it out. There are ways you can alter an image that is not necessarily evil or bad.
Okay.
And that could be okay in the context of an election, but I think that that's a fair question. I also think, there are, and I'm not a tech expert on synthetic media, so you might want to hear some testimony on somebody who does know how to do it, and where that fine line is. I think a full ban might be difficult to implement. So this is just saying it's okay to use it, but you have to say that you've used it, and maybe you want to make that stricter to say that you've used it and how you've used it. I don't know.
Okay.
But I think a ban might be challenging and might cut out some potentially okay uses of it.
And I assume some of the other states that have passed it, they're not all the same mirrored bill that this is. They have different sort of variations, and maybe our witness, Ms. Beller, will be able to help us out with that.
Yeah, I think so. And another resource that I find really helpful on elections policy is NCSL. They have an excellent staff of people who track legislation across the country, and I've worked with them closely. Wendy, and I'm blanking on Wendy's last name, but she's great, and I'm sure they would be happy to come in and help you understand what other states have done. Each state has done a little bit different. So this is based on a sort of framework that's passed nationally, and then everybody has done their own kind of a little bit different version of it.
Maybe we should get her into the chat to.
I'd be glad to add her to the list.
Yeah. NCSL is always a really good resource.
They are, and particularly on data private, all the data issues, they're pretty fun.
Yeah, and There's another resource that actually somebody from NCSL moved to, and I think it's called Fair Vote. And they are also a nonpartisan national voting rights organization, and they may have some more information on how this is being implemented nationally. And yeah, and obviously the Secretary of State's office, I believe they're supportive of this concept. So
Right.
they might have some suggestions.
Does anyone else have questions for Senator Hardy regarding this? Yes, Senator White.
So I was wondering a little bit about that fine line. Is there any state that you saw that had a good differentiator between the fine line, or one that you felt we should had a good robust discussion? Because as someone who's on social media, I've certainly, added the cat ears
Right.
to a photo or two.
So that count is
Well,
AI though.
that's kind of my question is
Yeah.
if I've used a filter that has changed my anything. Yeah. So do you have any recommendations on states? I know you said Wendy from NCSL. I wrote her down, but
Yeah, I would, NCSL, Public Citizen, I think will have some suggestions on what they think are the strong bills from other states. I tend to look at what has Massachusetts done because they're close, they're a neighbor, they're, similar to us in New England. So you could look at what their legislation is, and it would be easy to get them in here to testify. But I don't have a specific state in my head. I think that Texas and California were early adopters, so there may be some things that have happened since they passed their law that have changed the technology.
And it would, it'd be great to get how have they actually caught it? Has it been exercised? That would be very useful because then they will probably have some feedback on.
Right.
Uh,
And there's probably people that don't feel this is something they want to do, and we should probably hear from them too.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people who are opposed to it. There almost
Well, I'm
always
thinking-
are
I
people who
think
are
we've already
opposed.
received a request from
Yeah.
some social media to exempt them from this,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah,
I
I think once you start exempting one thing,
Yeah.
it's pretty hard that everybody's gonna come in and ask for an exemption. So I think trying to get it to be as strong as possible and applied
Okay,
uniformly is better. But I trust you guys to hear all the
Yeah,
testimony and
okay.
figure that out.
Senator,
so in appreciation for,
everything in white didn't get through, everything in light blue, like for instance, Vermont is pending.
Yep,
Everything in dark blue passed pre-2024. And then the blue passed
yeah.
2024.
There's a lot of states that worked on this issue. It's
So they're
clearly
aware
a
of it. So
yeah.
this is just a roadmap,
hot issue.
which we have,
given
you
the
have,
technology.
I've already read it, yep.
yeah, you have a roadmap of it, and it's kind of interesting that, Louisiana, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Indiana, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Kansas, none of them have voted for it.
Okay.
It failed every time.
Again, unless you have a question specifically for Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I just wanted to show her
in
that graph. I didn't
appreciation-
know if she did have it.
In appreciation of her time, she
Oh,
needs
yes.
to leave the building. If we could move to the other topic, the county governor or regional governance.
Yeah.
We haven't really done anything yet. I was
Yep.
trying to get a hold of former Rep McCarthy to come in and testify, but we didn't apparently connect with him.
Okay,
So it's something that we need to do, and if you in like the next 5 minutes could just bring the committee up to date on
sure.
where we are. I know the last meeting, I think, was October.
Yep.
And
Yeah, so the returning members of the committee will recall that we passed a bill unanimously last session to create the County Regional Governance Study Committee. And that was largely inspired by the first year of the biennium, last biennium. Pretty much every topic we talked about in here, somebody would inevitably say, this would be easier to solve if we had county government. And it was a really big range of topics. So, flood relief and natural disaster preparation, public safety, our long conversation about dispatch
land.
and EMS, land use, property appraisals, even when we had our conversation about ranked choice voting and counting ballots. So and then we had a lot of conversations about the capacity of municipalities to do the things that they need to do nowadays, whether it's following open meeting law or applying for FEMA grants in the wake of a massive flood in the town. Our tiny little select boards in particular, but even our larger towns and cities are pretty overwhelmed at the municipal level in a lot of cases, especially the towns that don't have professional staff. That are often run by volunteers, and in some towns, those volunteers are all sort of interrelated in a lot of cases. So we heard a lot of testimony from municipalities that were feeling a little overwhelmed, to say the least. And especially in the wake of the flooding in 2023 and 2024, those municipalities were asked to do even more. And so this was a study committee that was set up in order to look at potential changes to our county and regional government in order to take some things off the plate of municipal government and potentially take some things off the plate of state government and have a more regional structure for a lot of these things. Just this morning, actually, in natural resources, we were hearing testimony on this bill about salt and the use of salt in plowing. And we were getting testimony from other states about what they do. And I just noticed every single time when they said, and the county plows, so I think that even our little towns that own plows or fire trucks and salt sheds and all those things, which are great and we hear a lot about those at town meetings, but often those are really expensive. So a lot of this bill was inspired by how do we deal with capacity issues? Is there a more effective way of providing services to Vermont citizens at the local and regional level? Is there a more efficient and cost-effective way of doing it so that we're not duplicating services across towns? Mm-hmm. And then is there a more sort of equitable or, depending on where you live, you get different types of services. If you live in a big town or a little town or in the north or the south, you could get radically different services, even though you're a Vermonter, just like the other person is. So it was really to look at all of those issues. And one of the things that really surprised me about the conversation was just how many people came to me and to other members of the committee and said, this is a really great idea. And it was basically across the state, across the political spectrum, across, a lot of different people who I wouldn't have expected were like, we should do this. And not necessarily this, knowing what to do, but we should have this conversation and we should figure out a better way of doing things that's more 21st century. Okay. So it was created. The administration was also really interested. If you haven't already had him in here, talking with Doug Farnham, yeah. he was the sort of point person for the administration in the committee room, and he comes at it largely from a flood recovery perspective. But his team has done some really great work with mapping. They were able to use a FEMA grant actually to do a 3D map. And they overlaid all of the regional governance structures that we have in Vermont on top of each other. It's fascinating. The last I heard, they had 13 layers of maps on top of each other. But he and his staff can give you a demonstration on that to show just how complicated we've made it. And we have done it. We collectively over a number of years have created all these regional governance structures. Some of them are specialized in statute, but like our communication unions districts for broadband. Some of them have come out of, states, like the state offices, like the departments of health. Some of them, and the planning commissions, all of this. Our county government is in the Constitution, and there are some county officers, as we all know well from our conversations last session. So those exist, but there's very little oversight. There's very little transparency. The county governments do have a budget. They do have the ability to raise taxes if they so choose, but there's no way or very little way that taxpayers know what's going on there. And there's very little accountability. It's really hard to say, hey, you're not doing a good job. We want you out. So that was another thing, is sort of how do we deal with the accountability of local and regional government. So the county government study committee was created, and we, as you all know, from every time we try to create a committee in this building, it started to get really big. Everybody was like, I want on. So the way that we dealt with it, and I will give credit to Doug Farnham for coming up with this idea, was to create a legislative committee with a technical advisory group. And the technical advisory group has basically all the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And there's a number listed, but that technical advisory group started to be like, hey, you want to come? You can come. You can be on the group. So the legislators, there's three senators, 3 House members, with the GovOps chairs co-chairing, so that there's like sharing the responsibility. And the technical advisory committee, I asked Michael Gahn, who's sitting right here, who heads up the bond bank, and he can tell you more about himself and his work, if he would be willing to sort of facilitate the technical advisory group. And Michael was really helpful in testimony in this room about that committee. In large part, one, because he, and he'll tell you more, but, you know, he, as the loan agent for a lot of our municipalities, he works a lot with them to understand their capacity issues. And so he noticed and repeatedly notices the capacity issues with our municipalities and their inability or struggle to do some things. But he also doesn't have a horse in the race, so to speak, you know, so he's more of a neutral party than a lot of the people. So I asked him to facilitate, and he's been doing a great job of sort of working with that group of people who do have horses in the race, you know, the VLCT and the planning commissions and, you know, all the county officials and stuff. So they have a stake in the game. But they now have an ability to say what they think. We started to meet in late August. There was a September 1 deadline for meetings. So I think we met like August 28th or something like that, the committee. And the technical advisory group sort of met parallel to us, and then people came to our meetings. So we met late August and September and October. And then we were scheduled to meet in early December. But once the election happened and Representative McCarthy was not reelected, we decided to pause it because we would need new people. And then again, when I wasn't made chair of this committee, it's sort of on hold.
Okay.
But we did meet 3 times, and those meetings were largely to get some groundwork done about what are the options out there. And so some of the testimony was a repeat of what we all heard in this room.
Okay.
From the National Association of County Governments. And then also there is another model that some states use. All but 2 states have counties. The only 2 states that don't have county government are Connecticut and Alaska.
We have some.
We do.
We have some sheriffs.
Yeah, we have some county
And
government. They don't have
assistant
any
judges.
county government in those 2 states. And in Connecticut, they use what's called a council of governments model. And other states use this too. California has a version of it. Oregon has a version. I think Maine has a version of it. So we heard some testimony from Connecticut Council of Governments, which is, it's hard for me to describe it, but is essentially like a council of local governments that get together, and the council itself
So 16th century.
is the council itself is the thing that manages the regional government, but there are other entities that carry out some of the duties.
Okay.
So we heard from them and got a lot of information about how that could work in a New England state, because Connecticut and I believe Maine also does it. And that is something that actually our regional planning commissions have proposed in the past. There was a bill, I believe, in 2017 about council of governments, and The regional planning commissions have strong feelings about this. So you could hear from them. And we also started to break things into categories of issues, like, regular kind of public services like plowing roads, et cetera. But also public safety is a big issue. I was really adamant that public safety not be the only issue that was talked about, that this can't be just about regional public safety. It's got to be about broader governance. But that's obviously a big issue when you think about, ambulance and EMS and fire and police and sheriffs and how does it all work and dispatch.
Well, that's where we began all those years ago, looking at regional.
Yeah, so I mean, it's clearly a big issue, but I didn't want it to eclipse all the other things. I think there's some other pretty hot topics right now. Property appraisal. There was a big study that just came out
Yeah.
based on work that we did in this room. There also, there are technical technology related issues with the CUDs. There are things like we added the BSBA onto the technical advisory group because there's a lot of conversation about school facilities and, should there be like regional or county school facilities? So there are a lot of issues that are ripe for talking about. In addition, the committee has a $50,000 appropriation that comes with it. Part of it is to pay the stipends of the people on the per diems, but part of it was to be able to hire a consultant to do some of the research for us. In large part because there was a sort of promise that we wouldn't make JFO and let council do it because they are sort of overwhelmed. So we had been on the cusp of reaching an agreement for a contract with the Leahy Center for Rural Studies at UVM. And they have a professor who's relatively new. I think this may be her first year, who's a specialist on county and regional government. So she was actually going to do some research with her graduate students. There's a master's program there, and she was going to have her master's students do some surveying, some research, and come and present the committee with options and write a report for the committee on what their findings were. But that was supposed to happen this semester.
Yeah.
So with all the transitions that didn't happen. But Trisha Coates is the contact there. So I definitely recommend having her in and talking with them
Okay.
about the
We'll have her in.
possibilities. Yeah.
So in deference again, unless you can.
Yeah, I will wrap in 1 minute. So there is one thing you should be aware of for sure is that there's a report that is due November 1st of 2025 to the committees of jurisdiction. Given how everything's been paused, there's no way that deadline can be made with having any kind of good outcome. So in some vehicle that y'all have in here, you probably should extend that deadline.
Yeah.
And talking to people about when it would be.
Okay.
Would be good. And Rep. Byron has been sort of briefed on this stuff. I don't know where he's at with it right now.
I
but-
think he still needs one more member of his, because it's 3 senators, 3
Yeah.
House members. And the Senate side's all set,
Yeah, so
Senator
it's you and
Harris.
Senator,
and Norris and myself.
okay,
But I think he was lacking one the last time we talked.
okay.
But-
Yeah, so Senator Harrison and Senator Norris were obviously at those meetings as well.
Yep.
And it was a good committee in that the original committee stretched across the state. So there was, a bunch of different counties represented. So to the extent that that can be replicated, it would be helpful, but,
Okay.
and I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. This is, I think, an important issue for Vermont
Yep.
moving forward. So
We do appreciate your time this morning or this
my
afternoon.
pleasure.
I don't want you to be late for your next committee meeting.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Senator.
having me.
Bruce, thank you. Thank you for your work on this. Really great.
Thank
We
you.
teed it up.
Michael, if
Good
you'd
luck.
like to come up.
Take care. You too.
There's a possibility, this is my colleague Nicole Lee, she may be joining.
Please join us as well at the table if you'd like.
Nicole Lee in a new capacity.
Yes, we have a pitch hitter, not even so, it's a new star athlete.
It's great to see you. Angie.
Lovely to see you.
So, let's quickly go around and just introduce ourselves and then you can introduce yourself.
Sounds great.
Senator Larry Hart from Orange County. Must live in the town of Tofton. They probably work with me on a bond right now.
Yeah, exactly. And our loan officer is very excited because he lived there down that way for 8 years. So yeah, I think very excited to work on that field.
So they're working on for the town very regularly.
Yeah.
So
Allison Clarkson's Windsor District. Also a town that is looking at lots of different bonding aspects and Woodstock.
Yeah, 3 different programs. They're hitting the triple
I'm telling you, we
play.
just have so many great projects in town vision.
Brian Collmore representing the Rutland District.
I'm Jillian, the committee assistant.
Trying to be Chittenden in Central District.
And Senator Rebecca White from Windsor. So you are Michael Gahn.
Michael Gahn, Executive Director of the Vermont Bond Bank, and
I am Nicole Lee. I am the senior financial analyst, seen in the State House for a very different role this time last year.
Okay. So how can we get educated on this for those of us that weren't in the committee in the last biennium and certainly weren't on the governance committee?
with regard to the regional study.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll speak to that and then just wanted to hopefully earmark a couple minutes of time for something
Sure.
we're working on with
Yes, we
VLCT.
have all afternoon.
Okay, terrific.
Sorry, what you're working on with what?
With VLCT,
Yes, Great.
a proposal to help with some financial resiliency for municipalities.
great. Well, particularly in light of what's happening.
That's the
Very
idea,
helpful.
absolutely.
Right.
So as Senator Hardy mentioned, we kind of raised our hand, or I suppose did not look the other way when we were asked to help out with coordinating some of these stakeholders. And that's kind of a very interesting effort. And I think as Senator Hardy correctly mentioned, I don't have the full list with me, but I'm happy to share with you. We had a lot of people join. Hey, I heard about this. I'd like to join in. And we said, okay, we'll add you to this distribution list. And so we only had 2 meetings of this group. And on the first meeting, what we did was we tried to organize the sort of our thesis at the bond bank. And I think it was shared by a lot that, you know, this is really about capacity issues. And as we organized ourselves, I wanted to make sure that we were aware of what those capacity issues are, so that we could, so that as the legislative committee work, they could design solutions that actually fit what the problems are. So that's what we spent our time doing the first meeting, and I've shared that with you in the materials I shared, and really mapped out like what the themes were. And I mean, I don't think these are any surprise, but there's some specific questions that might be.
Are you sharing this?
Oh, would you like me to do that?
Sure. Would you like to
Do I
join?
plug in or do
Have a
I?
copy of,
It's probably on the website.
So if you join the Zoom meeting or something, I can send you
I'm not sure what the right protocol is. We had this discussion in the last committee.
I'll send you an email.
Okay.
Didn't tell that, what do you got for stocks today? All right, we got. Oh, honey.
These things are. It's on this screen, not on my screen.
I don't know why that appeared.
That's very strange.
Oh, okay. I guess that is my screen. Anyway, those are the little Zoom boxes. I'm not quite sure how to make those go away. But there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of stakeholders tried to have some sort of visual way to represent the themes that were emerging and their sort of concentration. And disaster response, no surprise, was a big discussion, as was infrastructure and housing issues and workforce. And then, of course, public safety. These boxes don't necessarily represent the intensity or the prioritization of these categories, but just speak to, the themes that were emerging. And so definitely in our experience, the workforce issues and the hiring of people and the professionalization of certain activities is the issue that interconnects a lot of these things. And so that's definitely an issue folks were focused on. And then, so that was really what we focused on in September. And then we met again in October, I think a little bit to Senator Hardy's chagrin. I said sort of like, what are your fears? Like what, what concerns you about this effort? Like, what do you need to sort of give away some of your control? And I think and again, I don't think this is rocket science or super surprising, but folks are really concerned about having another entity that might have overlapping taxing authority and might burden, their constituencies that already feel pretty stretched. And I think that was really the main theme. And then there were some questions on what is the best solution? We don't live in a huge state. There are many counties in the country that are smaller than the state of Vermont. So is it county government? Is it the COG model? Or is it something else? And so this, I think,
COG is Council of Governments.
Council of Governments, exactly. Excuse me.
Yeah, Senator Clarkson.
The county already has taxing capacity. Taxing ability.
Right. I think their concern was if we layer on another layer of service, or if we have a new governmental entity that's more organized. The courthouses and the sheriffs are most sheriffs, I think, from my understanding, are contractual in terms of how they support themselves, but the counties are very low tax burden. But if you have full county government that needs to fund itself, what does that start looking like?
Right.
Does that
but there is a framework upon which you could build.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we brought to the legislative committee was I'm part of an organization called Government Finance Officers Association. It's composed of members of that name. It's about 20,000 people nationally. It's probably the biggest governmental trade organization. And we brought in one of my friends from that, who is the CFO for Metro, which is in and around Portland, Oregon. And they actually started out as a council of governments and then sort of evolved over the years into an elected body that intersects with counties and local jurisdictions. It has certain responsibilities within that framework. So I guess that's only to say that counties are a great option. It's a well understood framework, but there are others, since we're sort of starting from scratch. And I think the stakeholders were open to thinking about what is the sort of best structure that meets our needs on the ground. And also there was, if I'm to look over my notes again, there's I think a bias towards pragmatic solutions that can help now, because everyone has their capacity challenges right now. So that's kind of a tiny summary. There isn't.
I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Comes to mind. How many people are on that technical advisory commission, or whatever it's called, and are many of them still around? Or have some of them sort of drifted off into other spaces?
Well, after Senator Hardy and Representative McCarthy put the pause, we didn't reconvene.
Yeah.
But
they're all full-time people, I guess.
Yeah, they're all from either right. They're either representatives of their sort of local trade organization or their professional staff. Everyone's available. We had around 18 people participating or 18 organizations participating, and then legislatively named, we had only.
That's great.
We only had 10 organizations, so that just speaks to the number of interested people.
Okay, that must be quite a meeting to try to facilitate.
A little bit, it was challenging, but we only had 2. I think it'll work best when there's specific questions that come out of the legislative committee. That's like, we want feedback on X. We were sort of getting to know each other and like learning about what's possible. And I was trying to identify what some of the third rails are in that second meeting. so there can be a more targeted dialogue, but that's kind of where we left it.
Did the legislative committee meet en masse with the technical advisory folks?
No,
That would be like 35, 40.
yeah, that has not happened.
Okay.
Yeah, but the co-chairs did join that stakeholder meeting.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? Yeah, Allison, is that, no?
No, I'm just, I just want to keep this work moving.
I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, and it's particularly important. I mean, it was, sort of, I think our natural disasters and again, FEMA's, dependence on counties for dispersing funds. Because, it just really called the question on doing this in addition to our work. Brian and I this committee did a whole field trip, looking at regional challenges around, public safety, EMS, police, fire. And it's certainly something we've been very interested in and dispatch. So I mean, there've been a bunch of things just from this committee, let alone all the other things that Ruth mentioned. So I'm keen on keeping this going.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit anecdotal, but I think a good example, we obviously have these, one of the themes that did emerge was these mutual aid agreements that are sort of bilateral.
Yeah.
Are difficult to manage if you're solving more of a regional issue and remembering who's supposed to do what. So that did emerge, and I think that's really meaningful to that disaster response. And we have an example in our portfolio that I always point to as really interesting. There's obviously with regard to climate resiliency nationally, there are certain priorities that different interest groups have, and folks want to do green infrastructure or things that are very compelling from because they're avant-garde, they're new. But when I talk to folks nationally, I talk about our most successful climate resilience project that we financed. And it was a joint purchase of a gravel pit with Dummerston and I forget who their partner was in the project. That proved to be obviously extremely important. Hardwick did the same thing, although not a joint purchase. But we had a structure in which they could both participate in that very easily, because of the bond bank, because we pulled things up to our level.
Right.
And that's like the most important resiliency project that we sponsor of anything we've done in recent times. And you could not design a federal program, obviously, to address that particular issue. So it just speaks to, I think, the importance of pulling things up a level.
Senator Clarkson.
Well, and as we are trying to be open about the looking at school governance and how we rethink delivery of schools and how we maintain excellence or high quality education with a declining number of pupils. The regional conversation is also, because one of our regional forms of our municipalities are our school districts and our supervisory unions, all of which are regional. I think this is also, that's an additional overlay on this, which is the regionalization of the delivery of our, particularly our middle and high school education, and what that may lead to, and that will definitely probably be a regional effort too. So I mean, it's not, as we think outside the box, there's lots more that may be regional and delivered regionally.
Right. Yeah, I think the only, and listening in on Senator Hardy's comments and to your point about sort of flexibility of this moment is the watershed districts came up also from a planning perspective.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Which I thought was very interesting,
but that's more geographic, but it is defining.
Right, exactly. And so like anything, I mean, I would just encourage you to think openly about what the boundaries might look like, because county is an artifact of our
watersheds are
colonial government structures.
Right.
So
exactly. And watersheds are the most natural sort of geographic delineation.
Right.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes.
I coming at this with little, if any, knowledge about it, although to Senator Clarkson's point, back when the Senate Government Operations Committee did take a tour, I don't know how many, 5, 6 places we visited all over the state, and got a sense of each individual's locality's needs and ideas, and it was pretty informative.
Yeah, and challenged by go back to workforce, challenged by the lack of capacity for EMS and getting volunteers for EMS or fire or, and so they rely heavily on mutual aid and, which leads to the whole regional conversation.
Yeah, and as we get into this, of course, I have more to say. I do not want to miss the opportunity to talk to you about some of the other initiatives we're working on, but we work with a lot of small water systems. And
I guess.
I've spoken about that in several committees in the past. And what gets them into trouble from a financial management and oftentimes infrastructure management issue are not particularly complex issues. It's they had a planning loan or planning grant from this entity and then got a loan with this entity. And because they're a volunteer staff and they have a private operator, no one was sort of like checking the accounts to make sure that the money that was supposed to pay off this did. And at the same time, they had some minor crisis that then resulted in having some cash flow demands. And like one thing leads to another. And then, members of that prudential committee, the governing body committee at the fire district leave. And then next thing you know, you've got a full blown crisis. And all that really was needed was some basic bookkeeping and record keeping. Like it was a pretty low barrier investment that would have prevented that crisis. And so the solutions don't need to be like incredibly sophisticated. They just need to have professionalization of staff.
Which is one of our challenges.
Right.
Which we don't necessarily have in any of our challenges.
So do you want to move on to your VLCT piece?
Yes. Okay.
Was that chart you had, have you sent that to Jillian?
I did, yes.
Okay, so that's on.
Yeah. So this is the data.
So is this coming to us as a proposal from VLCT?
I think they're
Michael explain.
Oh, sorry.
yeah. They obviously have folks that spend their lives in this building. We don't. So I think they're working with a couple of different representatives to try and get this introduced. And I'm not sure where that stands. I can certainly provide you a follow-up. But I did just want to lay out these issues in the event it comes to this committee, and I'll inform the VLCT staff about what's going on. So obviously VLCT and the bond bank, we're in the front lines of it's a little advertisement for them, so I'm going to stick here to the facts. We're in the front lines of the issues related to the flooding of the past 2 years. And so we've been talking to each other about like, what do communities need? What flexibility might they need legislatively to build financial capacity to withstand the inevitable next disaster? And so we have 3 proposals, and I'll walk through them. One is to provide more flexibility on growing their unassigned fund balances. Mm-hmm. So this is the money that's left over that is very flexible to be used in terms of a crisis for bridging FEMA loans or doing emergency repairs or maybe paying out of pocket for things that help with resiliency. And so I can show you some data.
Can you just before you go too far, can you just share with us what an unassigned fund balance would be?
Yeah, think of it like that's Nicole. Think of it like equity in that community. That's an available resource. It very closely will match cash assets, but not necessarily. Just think of it as available resources that community can spend on priorities as they come up from time to time. What happens now is it really gets applied to the next year's budget to help essentially buy down the property tax rate. And there's sort of some very fiscally conservative thinking behind that, and that's perfectly appropriate. But the known unknowns, so to speak, I think that framework is very helpful to think about things. Are increasing. And so whether it be delays in federal funding that are completely unexpected or climate related issues or what have you, that financial flexibility is really important. And part of the reason we have the Northeast in general, we do a lot of work benchmarking financial ratios in our portfolio, comparing them to national benchmarks and regional benchmarks. And part of the reason in the Northeast that generally unassigned fund balance levels are lower. It's because of the dependence on property taxes. You don't have major sales tax revenue that is volatile from one year to the next. So you can kind of know what your revenues are going to be and have that pretty well under control. But as volatility increases due to things outside the control of that community, having a higher fund balance would be helpful. So that's number one. Number two is emergency borrowing authority. Right now, under statute, there's only a few very limited circumstances in which a municipality can borrow without voter approval. And what most, we ran what we call our municipal climate recovery fund that helped to provide medium-term financing and liquidity for communities after 2023 and after 2024. And what they had to do with this kind of workaround where under statute, they're allowed to borrow what's called a current expense note for things that come up that are unexpected. And then you're allowed to refinance that into long-term debt after 1 year. That works okay if you're working with an entity like the bond bank that can kind of manage that process. But we became eligible, the state that is, became eligible for this really advantageous FEMA program called the Community Disaster Loan Program. And it's required to be a 5-year term on that loan and can include a significant amount of loan forgiveness if that community continues to have expenses that outrun revenue. And because of our statute, those communities that were interested in that program, Barry in particular had an interest, would have had to go to voters with that. And that's kind of a tough ask when you're in the middle of an emergency and it's a thing that doesn't really make any sense. And so no community was able to take advantage of that because FEMA was not able to accommodate that the sort of refinancing mechanism that I described before. And the other thing is that the current expense note really subjects you, if the bond bank isn't there, subjects you to market risk in a year's time when you need to refund that sort of bridge loan, if you will, that cash flow note. And as we know from 2011, and we're certainly experiencing after 2023, these FEMA costs are unresolved for a very long time.
Oh, and putting huge pressure on our towns.
Right, exactly. So like I came to the bond bank in 2018, and then up until 2022, we look at all these audits, and I was still seeing unresolved FEMA costs. And those were showing up as negative fund balances because a current expense note is a short-term liability. So if we structure that in a medium term, it relieves that community of the market access pressure, structures it in a way that allows them breathing room, and just sort of makes it more transparent generally to the public as to what's going on. So that's the second proposal.
Mhm.
And then the last proposal is I'm going to turn it to Nicole here to describe, but I'll just say as a context, it's something that exists in every other state for the most part and is really at the margin. So Nicole has learned this recently, so I think like if she can explain it, she'll be able to explain it to all of you better than I could.
So currently we have in statute a level principal for the repayment of debt, which means that the principal is spread over the term of the bond or the loan, and paid the same amount over all of those years. What that does is create a higher principal and interest burden in the beginning of the loan because your principal is staying the same, so you're paying more interest. And I will say, yes, there's municipalities that experience this. My experience is with education. And when you have a level principal loan or bond, any bit of money that you're saving on principal and interest over time, right? It'd be perfect if it went into your reserve account for future capital, but that's a hard sell because there are, of course, always other expenses needing that perceived savings. And so in level debt, which is another way to repay, that's actually having a level principal and interest payment over the term of the bond or loan, and makes it so that, yes, there is more interest paid over the life of the debt, but it does also create some future forward-looking known debt, right? Like, you know what it's gonna be year over year. And so that's the request that we're advocating for, is the ability to have level debt as a repayment option.
Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am shocked that we don't already allow that, actually. It seems like a really useful tool, especially if you're in a community where you're potentially taking out money to purchase something that long-term may generate more revenue for you. So I'm thinking the property tax may go up, your grand lists may go up. There's all sorts of things where in the future you might be able to reasonably predict that you'd be able to make that payment if it was larger later on, and in the short term is less. Is that true?
So actually, in level debt, it stays the same the whole
Oh, it
term.
does.
Yeah, and so what's nice, I mean, we do have, and I'll defer to Michael on this, there is certainly a third repayment option. I'm not as clear on it, where you defer the principal over time.
Yeah, so current statute, and there's the picture. It's it's a little easier to visualize it. So that's what we have right now. You do a bond, but this is what we're trying to do, which it looks exactly like your mortgage.
I was gonna say, this is like a fixed
That's
rate
right.
mark.
That's right.
Mhm.
So what this result, I mean, why are we asking for this in a resiliency package? Well, if you're going to take on capital to improve some infrastructure, like, we don't want to stress the budget for doing the right thing. And so this is the proposal. I mean, you're allowed to do this for municipal utilities and certain other plans currently, but not for general purpose bonds. And this is very standard practice in the public finance world. You are allowed to defer principal payments for up to 5 years. We don't suggest that changes. But what we don't want to see would be what's called backloaded debt service, so that, in years 20 through 30, you all of a sudden ramp up your payments. That's not great financial management. But this is a very common sense approach that is really just an artifact of time.
Yeah.
And most states have moved to change this.
Kind of like not just a mortgage, but a car loan payment.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You keep paying the same amount.
that's right.
yeah, fixed rate is.
And in the short term, it just maybe provides some budgetary relief as opposed to do the right thing.
Okay, I was thinking it was the exact opposite. So now this.
No,
makes
you're not
more
gaining
sense.
interest, which would be great if it was.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Why would we allow that? So these are all recommendations that you've clearly laid out with legislative recommendations as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's
Which is
draft
so-
language yet, but certainly we can add
Looks-
something.
It looks like basically drafted language, I mean, or there's recommended language.
Yeah, we worked with we worked with the local legal community to make sure that all of this fit.
Local council.
Hasn't gone to ledge council. The folks that we work that write the
Oh,
opinions, we wanted to make sure they were comfortable with the language. So VLCT, we both worked on all that. So I don't know if VLCT has a proposed bill yet,
We can have them in.
but I will certainly.
Okay.
Well, they
communicate
can't
that to them.
propose. But I mean,
Right, no, understood.
Here.
I don't
So this
know if there's
could-
one over on the house side or something like that.
Okay.
This could conceivably be a committee bill here, or one of us could.
Yeah. Sure. Well, thank you, Michael
Yeah.
and Nicole. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Yeah, this is nice, and
Maybe we'll have you back.
we love it. Yeah, this is a great.
Well, it's good to have you in, and thank you for taking it on.
Yes.
And Nicole, great to see you in a different spot.
Senator Hart.
Yes, sir, I just, what is the interest rate on the bonds?
We
Is it
It
flexible?
depends.
flexible, right?
So the way our typical programs work, unless they are a dedicated source of funding, is that they float with the market. And then when we sell our bonds, it gets locked in for a fixed rate. So I was just looking at this. So if you bear with me, I can give you a sense of stuff for Thompson. So I can't remember offhand what term that they were looking at, but I'm guessing it's around 20 years. So it looks like a little over 4%, somewhere like 4.1%.
4.1.
And that's a tax exempt rate. Hopefully the tax exemption stays around. It is up for discussion at the federal level.
Yeah, we talked about it. It was either a 15 or a 20 year
Okay,
They were,
they might be a little bit lower than that.
I think they were gonna go 15,
Okay, then it might be, yeah, it might be more, might be more in the high threes.
high threes, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that's what they were gonna do.
Okay,
Cause it figured out it was gonna cost me, for every $100,000 of my property value in Thompson, it was gonna cost me $68 extra
okay,
for the municipality tax,
got it,
just to pay for the town bridge.
got
It
it.
was fine. I had no problem seeing, I'm the one who facilitated the town garage, bought the property,
Okay,
town, got everything rolling. And then when I took over this position here, I backed out of the select board and said, let somebody else take over.
I see.
So you've probably been dealing with Jake Thompson.
Our loan officer has been doing the majority of the conversations
With Jake,
with
yeah.
local folks,
Yes,
yeah.
he's an attorney that's took my position.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So great kid,
Yeah,
only like 28 years old.
oh, that's great.
So I nominated him, got him elected.
Yeah, well, it's worth mentioning our rate, is credit enhanced by the state and
Yeah.
benefits from all, our pooled structure. And so, you're getting as good a rate as is available in the market.
Yeah.
Because of our AA+ rating. So should save you some money even at $68.
Yeah. Yeah, but it didn't bother me at all to pay that extra. We need a town garage.
Well, thank you again.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
So committee, before we take a break and we have our next witness coming in, I'd like to take a vote on H78
Okay,
as promised. And I will get this up to,
I have a question for you.
Secretary's office. Yes,
It said amendment sponsor, but I don't have.
we don't have any amendments. Or an element.
Okay, then, so I just write 878 up here,
Yeah, no amendments.
no amendments. Title, just under
Page 78.
Yeah.
With,
It's the,
the use of,
using the Australian ballot system.
Or not.
I hope nobody has questions on the fly. I can't imagine. I know it went through the house without one single question, so.
You're kidding.
No,
They must have all been. Oh,
well, it's not very controversial.
it is not.
I should say, for the record, does anyone have anything they want to add to this? We waited over the weekend in case somebody had questions.
Nothing came up.
You're
No one
nothing
was in
came up.
touch.
Yeah.
that was my only question.
So whenever you're ready, Mr. Clerk.
okay, I have to write down names here.
We should have a sheet with all our names on it.
Well,
Okay, but
today, just go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just gonna start here, maybe? Sure. I'm just gonna write names down. Spell your name, COL.
Two L's,
remember he goes last.
MORE.
They also are right here too.
Yeah, I got them up there. Yeah, right there, sorry. Yeah, I'll ask them.
Love the tie today too.
And now that I have her name, I can spell it here. What is this?
Just flowers.
Oh, how anticipatory.
Well, that's a very good adjective.
Yes. I don't like that. And it
It's not an
reflects on
adverb
beautiful
because it would end
people.
in L1.
Okay, I'm ready when you guys are ready.
I think we're all set.
Senator Hart, I'm gonna say. Say yes, because it's still an option for every community, every municipality.
Yeah.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator White,
Yes.
Senator.
Bobowski.
Yes.
And Senator Cole.
Yes.
Okay. Total 5.
So I will be recording this tomorrow. If I can get it on the floor, I'm gonna again try to use our leverage to get this out of our chamber by Wednesday at the most. Or early. I can call it up from the notice calendar.
You should, okay. And you can then.
Well,
suspend
I'll certainly
and
speak with the pro tem. He, it's his decision whether or not I suspend rules or he does. And I'll yield to his
And when Melissa comes in,
Right.
we'll go, yes.
Well, I'm gonna go up, I promised them I would take this up as quickly as we voted. So committee, we're gonna take a break and we will be back here. Let's go 2:35, which will give you about
Night.
10, 12 minutes, because we do have a witness.